The sickening crack of Madeline's diamond ring against my son's face wasn't just violence, it was the sound of a 60-year-old empire shattering. In that $1 million Newport dining room, time stopped. My husband stood like a stone statue while his mother panted, believing she had just taught a lesson in class. She was wrong. She didn't know I had spent 6 months decrypting her buried secrets. I stepped forward and spoke 6 words that ended her dynasty right there. My name is Avery Caldwell, and for the last 4 years, I have been a ghost haunting the edges of the Vance family portrait. I am 34 years old, a forensic data analyst for Vanguard Analytics, and in my line of work, we are trained to see the rot before the structure collapses. We look for the anomalies in the spreadsheets, the ghost employees on the payroll, the decimal points that shift just enough to bleed a company dry over a decade. I see patterns where others see chaos, but tonight, seated at the mahogany table in the dining room of the Hawthorns, the Vance family's ancestral estate in Newport, Rhode Island, I was trying desperately to ignore the data screaming in my face. The room was a mausoleum of old money. The air smelled of roasting turkey, sage, and the musty metallic scent of silver polish that hadn't quite aired out. Outside, the Atlantic wind battered the cliffs, but inside, the silence was heavier than the storm. A fire roared in the limestone hearth, theoretically providing warmth, yet the atmosphere was glacial. 20 guests sat around the table, a collection of Rhode Island's decaying aristocracy. People who spoke in hushed tones about summering in the Hamptons and wintering in Aspen, ignoring the fact that their trust funds were yielding less than inflation. At the head of the table sat Madeline Vance, my mother-in-law. She was a study in rigid control. Her silver hair was coiffed into a helmet that defied gravity, and her neck was draped in pearls that were likely worth more than the college tuition I'd been saving for my son. She didn't eat. She presided. She watched every fork lift, every napkin fold, calculating the social worth of every gesture, to her. I was an error in the family code. I was the working-class girl from Boston who had ensnared her golden boy, Julian. But worse than me was Leo. I looked down at my son. Leo is 8 years old. He has messy brown hair that never quite lies flat and eyes that are too big for his face, filled with a perpetual, anxious need to please. He is my son. From a previous relationship, a biological fact that Madeline treated like a contagious disease. She never called him by his name. She referred to him as the boy, or when she thought I wasn't listening. The burden. Sit up straight, Madeline snapped, her voice cutting through the clinking of silverware. She didn't look at Leo, but the command was clearly directed at him. Leo flinched. He straightened his spine so abruptly that his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Sorry," Leo whispered, his face flushing a deep, painful crimson. "We do not scrape furniture in this house," Madeline said, slicing her turkey with surgical precision. "It shows a lack of breeding." I felt the familiar heat rising in my chest, the protective instinct of a mother wolf, but I forced it down. I looked at Julian, sitting across from me, my husband, the man who had promised me that his family would accept us, that love would bridge the gap between my world of data and their world of pedigree. Julian was studying his green beans with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb. He said nothing. He never said nothing. "It is okay, Leo," I said softly, reaching under the table to squeeze my son's knee. "Just eat your dinner. Some of us are trying to enjoy the holiday." Bella, Julian's younger sister, chimed in. She was sitting to my right, sipping her 3rd glass of Chardonnay. Bella was 29, beautiful in a sharp, angular way, and possessed the cruelty of a high school bully who never grew up. She smirked at me over the rim of her crystal glass. Although I suppose table manners aren't a priority in public school. "Bella," Arthur Vance mumbled from the other end of the table. My father-in-law. He was once a titan of industry, but now, the Alzheimer's was slowly erasing him. He looked around the room with cloudy eyes, smiling at people who weren't there. Is Silas coming? He said he'd bring the horses. Eat your potatoes, Arthur, Madeline commanded, her tone devoid of affection. She looked at him not as a husband, but as a piece of furniture that had become inconvenient to maintain. The tension in the room was a physical weight. I took a sip of water, my mind drifting back to the encrypted files on my laptop back at our guest cottage. For the last 6 months, I hadn't just been the dutiful daughter-in-law, I had been working. Madeline thought my job was typing numbers, a cute little hobby to keep me busy. She didn't know that Vanguard Analytics specializes in forensic accounting for high-net-worth litigations. She didn't know that I had spent my nights tracing shell companies, cross-referencing offshore accounts, and piecing together a financial puzzle that painted a very different picture of the Vance dynasty. The empire wasn't just crumbling, it was a crime scene. "Pass the cranberry sauce, please," Madeline said. Her voice was light, but it was a command, not a request. She looked directly at Leo. Leo froze. The heavy silver gravy boat containing the cranberry sauce was positioned right in front of him. It was an antique, Georgian silver, heavy and awkward for an 8-year-old's hands. "I can get it," I said, reaching out. No, Madeline stopped me with a raised hand. Her diamond ring caught the chandelier light, sending a fractured rainbow across the table. "The boy needs to learn how to serve. It is a basic social grace. Go on." She nodded at the sauceboat. Leo looked at me, panic in his eyes. I gave him a small, encouraging nod, though every nerve in my body was screaming, "She is setting him up." Leo reached out. His small fingers grasped the cold silver handle. He lifted it. The boat was heavier than he expected. His wrist wobbled. "Careful," Bella sneered. The sudden sound of her voice startled him. Leo flinched. The heavy silver boat tipped. It happened in slow motion. I watched the dark red cranberry sauce, thick and gelatinous, pour out of the spout. It didn't land on a plate. It landed on the tablecloth. The tablecloth was lace, Belgian lace, from the 19th century. Madeline had spent the last hour bragging that it had been in the family since the 1800s. The red stains spread instantly, soaking into the delicate white fibers like a fresh arterial wound. It was a violent splash of color in the pristine, monochrome room. Clang! Leo dropped the boat in his horror. It hit the edge of the table and clattered onto the floor, splattering more sauce onto the Persian rug. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Leo was trembling. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I didn't mean." Madeline stood up. She didn't stand up gracefully. She surged upward, her chair flying back. Her face, usually a mask of boredom, was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. It wasn't just anger over a tablecloth. It was decades of resentment. The fury of a narcissist who feels her stage has been tarnished by a prop she never wanted. She marched around the table. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor like the ticking of a bomb timer reaching zero. "Madeline," Arthur said weakly, "it is just sauce." "Shut up," she hissed at him, not breaking her stride. I started to rise. "Madeline, it was an accident. He is a child." She ignored me. She reached Leo. My son was shrinking back in his chair, his eyes wide with terror, tears already welling up. "You clumsy, useless little mongrel!" She spat the words out. And then she moved. It wasn't a gesture of discipline, it was an act of war. She swung her right hand. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud. Her palm, heavy with that massive diamond solitaire, connected with Leo's cheek. The force of the blow knocked him out of his chair. He hit the floor hard, a small heap of velvet blazer and terrified boy. For a second, nobody breathed. The violence of it hung in the air, vibrating. "Ma!" Julian stood up halfway, his face pale, but he didn't move toward his son. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with shock, but also with that familiar, pathetic fear. He was waiting for her permission to be angry. Bella covered her mouth, but her eyes were dancing. She looked like a spectator at a gladiator match who had just seen blood. Leo lay on the floor, holding his face. He wasn't crying yet. He was in shock. A bright red welt was already rising on his cheek, and a small trickle of blood ran from where the ring had cut his skin. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, definitive click of a lock engaging. The Avery who wanted to be accepted. The Avery who tried to keep the peace. The Avery who hoped Julian would grow a spine. She died in that moment. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge at her. I stood up. I walked around the table, my movements calm, precise, fluid. I knelt beside my son. "Leo," I said, my voice steady. "Look at me." He looked at me, his lip quivering. "I messed up. Mom, I am sorry." "You did nothing wrong," I said. I pulled a handkerchief from my pocket and gently dabbed the blood on his cheek. My hands were steady. My heart was beating at a calm 60 beats per minute. It was the calm of the executioner. I helped Leo stand up. I brushed the crumbs off his knees. I turned him toward the door. "Go wait in the car. Honey, take my keys. Turn on the heater. I will be there in 2 minutes." "But—" "Go," I said gently. He ran. I watched him disappear into the hallway, away from these monsters. Then, I turned back to the table. Madeline was breathing heavily, her chest heaving. She was adjusting her ring, looking down at the stain on her tablecloth, as if the child she had just assaulted was less important than the laundry bill. "He ruined it," she muttered, her voice trembling with indignation. "He ruined the lace. You should have taught him better. Avery, this is your fault. You bring this trash into my house." I walked toward her. The guests watched me. They were paralyzed. They expected tears. They expected a shouting match. They expected the low-class daughter-in-law to cause a scene that they could gossip about over brunch tomorrow. I stopped right in front of her. I was 3 inches taller than Madeline, but tonight, I felt 10 feet tall. I didn't look at her face. I looked at her plate. It was bone china, imported from France, rimmed with 24-karat gold. I reached into the pocket of my blazer. My fingers closed around the cool, metallic surface of the object I had been carrying for 3 days. I pulled it out. It was a USB drive. Matte black, nondescript. It looked harmless. It looked like something you would use to store family photos or a high school essay. But this drive contained 3 gigabytes of forensic imaging I had pulled from the shadow server Madeline thought was secure. It contained the scans of the double ledgers. It contained the emails she had sent to the offshore shell corporation in the Caymans. It contained the proof of the embezzlement that had been draining the family trust for 15 years. I placed the USB drive gently on her plate, right next to the untouched turkey. It made a soft clack against the china. Madeline looked down at it. She frowned, confused. "What is this?" She looked up at me, her eyes narrowing. "Is this some kind of joke? Take your trash and get out of my house?" I met her gaze. I didn't blink. I let the silence stretch for 1 second, 2 seconds, letting the curiosity in the room peak. Then, I delivered the payload. "The auditing logs were sent yesterday." The color drained from Madeline's face so fast, it looked like the blood had been siphoned out of her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from me to the USB drive, and then to Julian. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a raw, primal terror. She knew. She knew exactly what I had access to. She knew exactly what auditing logs meant in the context of the emails she had deleted, or thought she had deleted. Her hand shook. She reached for her wine glass, perhaps to steady herself, perhaps to throw it at me. But her nerves failed her. Her fingers fumbled. Smash! The crystal goblet hit the table, shattering into 1,000 diamonds. Red wine exploded outward, joining the cranberry sauce on the 19th century lace. A twin river of blood. "Avery," Julian stammered, standing up fully now. "What did you say? What is going on?" I didn't answer him. I didn't look at him. He had lost the right to my attention the moment he stayed seated while his mother struck his son. I turned my back on them. I turned my back on the $1 million room. the fire, the silver, and the rotting legacy of the Vance family. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said to the room at large, my voice cool and professional, as if I were closing a business meeting. I walked out of the dining room, the sound of my heels echoing on the parquet floor, leaving the echo of collapse ringing in their ears. I didn't look back. I had a son to comfort, and a war to win. The drive back to our apartment was suffocated by a silence so heavy it felt like a third passenger in the car. The rain had started in earnest, drumming a relentless, chaotic rhythm against the roof of my SUV, washing away the pristine coastline of Newport and replacing it with the blurred gray reality of the highway. In the rearview mirror, I watched Leo. He was staring out the window, counting raindrops, or perhaps counting the seconds until he felt safe again. He wasn't crying. That terrified me more than tears would have. Tears are a release. Silence is a containment vessel for trauma. When we finally merged onto the exit ramp toward the city, a small, fragile voice broke the quiet. "Mom, am I a mistake?" The question hit me with the force of a physical blow to the sternum. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned the color of bone. I pulled the car over onto the breakdown lane immediately, ignoring the spray of gravel. I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned around to face him. "Leo, look at me," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "Why would you ask that?" He touched his cheek, where the red mark of Madeline's ring was already beginning to darken into a bruise. "Grandma said, she said I was a burden. She said I didn't belong." "She is wrong," I said, fierce and low. "She is a mean, unhappy woman who lies to make herself feel big. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You are my world. Do you understand? You are not a mistake. You are my purpose." He nodded, but his eyes remained old. Too old for an 8-year-old boy. He had learned a lesson tonight that no mother wants her child to learn, that adults can be monsters, even the ones who are supposed to be family. As I merged back onto the highway, my mind drifted, dissecting the last 4 years of my life. I had married Julian Vance believing in the myth of the reformer. I thought he was the one Vance who had escaped the gravitational pull of his mother's narcissism. Julian was kind. He was gentle. He remembered anniversaries and made pancakes on Sundays. But I had made a critical error in my analysis of his character. I had mistaken compliance for kindness. Julian wasn't a bad man. He was a hollowed-out one. Madeline had spent 35 years carving out his spine, vertebrae by vertebrae, until he was nothing more than a beautiful, well-dressed extension of her will. In behavioral psychology, we call it learned helplessness. He had been conditioned to believe that resisting Madeline resulted in pain, while submission resulted in peace. Tonight, that conditioning had won out over his instinct to protect his own cub. My phone, resting in the cup holder, lit up the dark cabin with spasmodic flashes of light. Julian calling, Bella calling, text from Bella. "You ungrateful bitch. You ruined everything. Text from Bella." "Pick up the phone." "You psycho." Julian calling. I let it ring. I let the vibrations rattle against the plastic console. Noticeably absent from the barrage was Madeline. Her silence was not a retreat. It was a tactical maneuver. Madeline Vance did not text insults like a petulant teenager. She did not call to beg. She operated like a grandmaster who had just lost a bishop and was quietly assessing the board to sacrifice a rook. She was regrouping. She was calling her lawyers, her fixers, her bankers. She was dangerous precisely because she was quiet. I knew exactly when the war had truly started. It wasn't tonight. Tonight was just the first shot fired in the open. The war had begun 3 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk at Vanguard Analytics, cross-referencing a client's tax returns, when the pharmacist called. She told me that Leo's prescription for his asthma inhaler had been declined. "Insurance coverage terminated," the computer screen had said. I assumed it was a glitch. I called the provider. They told me the policyholder had removed Leo as a dependent. The policyholder was the Vance Family Trust. When I confronted Julian about it back then, He had looked panic-stricken. He called his mother. Madeline had claimed it was a clerical error by the new account manager. She apologized. She sent Leo a toy train set as a peace offering. Julian accepted the explanation immediately because it was easier than confronting the alternative. But I didn't. I am a forensic data analyst. I don't believe in clerical errors. Errors are random. This was specific. I used my credentials to access the back-end logs of the insurance provider, a gray area legally. But I was a mother first and an analyst second. The logs showed no system error. They showed a manual entry authorized by M. Vance at 2 p.m. That was the moment the veil dropped. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had tried to take away my son's ability to breathe, simply to save a few $1,000s a year on a premium, or perhaps just to see if she could. Madeline had forgotten what I did for a living. To her, I was just a data girl, someone who typed numbers into spreadsheets. She didn't understand that my entire career was built on hunting predators who hid behind complex corporate structures. I spent my days tracking embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud for the biggest firms on the East Coast. She had invited a wolf into her henhouse and treated it like a sheep. We arrived at our apartment building in downtown Providence. It was a nice place, modern and secure, a safe distance from the suffocating grandeur of Newport. I got Leo settled in his bed. I read to him until his breathing evened out into sleep, though he twitched occasionally, reliving the slap in his dreams. I went to the living room and poured myself a glass of water, my hands finally shaking now that I didn't have to be strong for Leo. The front door unlocked at midnight. Julian stumbled in. The smell of expensive single malt scotch entered the room before he did. He looked disheveled. His tie was undone, his top button unfastened, his hair windblown. He looked like a man who had walked through a hurricane. He saw me standing by the window, staring out at the rain-slicked street. "Avery," he breathed, closing the door behind him. "Thank God. I have been calling you for 2 hours." I didn't turn around. "I know." He walked over, reaching out to touch my shoulder. I stepped away, putting the sofa between us. The rejection made him flinch. "Babe, please," he said, his voice thick with alcohol and desperation. "You have to understand, Mom. She is not herself lately. The estate taxes, the maintenance on the house, Dad's condition. She is under so much pressure." She snapped. It was an accident. I turned to face him then. The rage I felt was cold, crystalline, and sharp. "An accident," I repeated, my voice flat. "Julian." She walked across the room. She looked him in the eye. She swung her hand. "That is not an accident. That is assault." "She didn't mean to hit him that hard," Julian pleaded, rubbing his face with his hands. "She feels terrible. She is hysterical right now. She is worried about what people will think." "She is worried about her reputation," I corrected him. "She is not worried about the 8-year-old boy she knocked to the floor. She is my mother, Avery. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to be a father," I shouted, the control finally slipping. "I want you to protect your son. I want you to stop making excuses for a woman who hates us." Julian looked defeated. He slumped onto the ottoman. "You don't know what it is like. You don't know what she can do. You shouldn't have given her that drive. Avery, you shouldn't have threatened her. She will destroy us. She will cut us off." "Let her," I said. "We don't need her money. I have a job. You have a degree. We can live like normal people." "Normal people." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I don't know how to be a normal person. I have never paid a mortgage in my life. I don't know how to live without the safety net." There it was, the naked truth. He wasn't staying silent out of love. He was staying silent out of fear of poverty. He was a hostage to his own comfort. I pulled out my phone and swiped to the photo I had taken of Leo in the car. I shoved the screen in front of his face. "Look at this," I commanded. Julian looked. He saw the purple bruise blooming on Leo's pale cheek. He saw the fear in his stepson's eyes. He squeezed his eyes shut and turned his head away. "I can't," he whispered. "You will," I said. "This is the reality. Julian, this is what your inheritance costs. It cost Leo's safety. I pulled the phone back and looked him dead in the eye. I am giving you a choice, and I'm only going to give it once. You can choose your mother, the woman who hit your child, or you can choose your wife and son. But you cannot have both, not anymore. Julian opened his mouth to speak, to argue, to find the gray area he had lived in for 35 years. Don't speak, I cut him off. Not unless you have an answer. And looking at you right now, I can see you don't. I pointed to the sofa. You sleep here tonight. If you are still here in the morning, I will assume you are ready to fight for us. If you go back to Newport, then don't bother coming back. I turned and walked toward the bedroom. Julian didn't follow. I heard him collapse onto the sofa, the soft thud of a man whose strings had been cut. I went into my bedroom and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a hyper-vigilant paranoia. I logged into our home security system. My heart skipped a beat. On the feed from the front door camera, I saw a car parked across the street. It was a black sedan, an older model, engine idling, lights off. It wasn't a neighbor. In our quiet residential neighborhood, nobody idled at 1 a.m. Madeline moved fast. I switched tabs to the system diagnostics. A red banner flashed across the screen. Failed login attempt. Source unknown, IP. Someone was trying to hack the cameras. They wanted to see inside. They wanted to know if we were fighting, if I was packing, if I was vulnerable. Madeline was trying to get eyes on the enemy. I typed a quick command, rerouting the port access and strengthening the firewall. I blocked the IP address. It was a temporary fix, but it would hold them off for a few hours. A notification pinged in the corner of my screen. A new email. My personal email address was secure, encrypted, and known only to a handful of people. I clicked on the inbox. The sender was anonymous. The subject line was chillingly simple. Subject, I know what she did to his sister. I stared at the screen. Julian didn't have a sister. He was an only child. That was the narrative I'd been told for 4 years. That was the story on the family Wikipedia page. I opened the email. There was no text in the body, just an attachment, a scanned image of a birth certificate from 38 years ago. Name Serafina Vance. Mother Madeline Vance. Father Arthur Vance. My breath caught in my throat. A sister. A secret sister erased from existence. I looked back at the security feed. The black car was still there, a silent sentinel in the rain. Madeline thought she was besieging me. She thought she had me trapped, but she had just handed me the one thing she couldn't buy. Bully, or Barry. She had handed me a loose thread, and I was going to pull it until the whole tapestry unraveled. The email sat on my screen like an open wound, the digital pixels glowing with radioactive intensity in the dark room. I know what she did to his sister. It was 3 a.m. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and expectant. I didn't sleep. Instead, I worked. I was a bloodhound catching a scent, and the scent was rotting paper and buried secrets. I ran a background check on Serafina Vance. In the official family records, she did not exist. There were no photos of her on the mantle at the Hawthorns. There were no mentions of her in the society columns that fawned over Madeline's galas. But data is harder to kill than memories. I found her in the deepest recesses of the state archives. Birth certificate legitimate. Social security number active. Current address a small, unregistered apartment above a commercial space in a town called Wickford, about 40 minutes from Newport. When the sun finally bled through the blinds, painting the room in gray light, I walked out to the living room. Julian was asleep on the sofa, one arm hanging off the edge, looking younger and more vulnerable than the man who had stood by while his mother assaulted my son. I kicked the leg of the coffee table. He jerked awake, blinking against the morning light. Avery, what time is it? It is time to talk about Serafina, I said, my voice cutting through his grogginess like a scalpel. Julian froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, trying to buy time that I wasn't going to give him. How do you know that name? He whispered. Who is she? Julian, I demanded. And don't you dare lie to me. I have her birth certificate printed out in the kitchen. Julian slumped forward, putting his head in his hands. She is my sister, my older sister. She is 3 years older than me. Why isn't she in the photos? Why does nobody speak her name? Because she left, Julian said, his voice muffled by his hands. 15 years ago, she was 21. She fell in love with a man named Marcus. He was a jazz musician. He was kind, talented, and he loved her. He paused, taking a shaky breath. And he was black. The air in the room grew colder. I felt a wave of nausea. I knew Madeline was a snob, but this was a visceral, archaic hatred that turned my stomach. Mother said... Julian looked up, his eyes wet. Mother said she wouldn't have the family line polluted. She gave Serafina a choice: leave Marcus and marry the investment banker she had picked out, or be cut off. Serafina chose Marcus. Mother disowned her that night. She burned every photo of her in the fireplace. She told me that if I ever spoke to her, I would be next. So you just let her erase your sister? I asked, the disappointment tasting bitter in my mouth. I was 18. Avery, I was a kid. I was terrified. You are 31 now, I said. Get dressed. We are going for a drive. We left Leo with my mother, who had driven down from Boston to help, and headed toward Wickford. Julian was silent the entire ride, staring out the window at the passing trees, as if he were watching his own life unravel. Wickford was a charming, sleepy village, the antithesis of Newport's aggressive wealth. We parked in front of a small shop called the Dusty Spine. It was a used bookstore, its windows cluttered with hardcovers and potted plants. The bell chimed as we walked in. The smell of old paper and vanilla filled the air. A woman was behind the counter, stacking books. When she turned around, I gasped. She had Julian's eyes, the same soft, melancholic brown eyes. But hers were framed by laugh lines, not worry lines. She wore a chunky knit sweater and messy hair. She looked real. Can I help you find... She stopped. She dropped the stack of books. They hit the floor with a heavy thud. Julian, she breathed. Serafina, Julian choked out. For a moment, they just stared at each other. 15 years of silence stretching between them. Then, Serafina moved. She didn't scream or slap him. She walked around the counter and pulled him into a hug that looked like it was holding his shattered pieces together. Julian broke down, sobbing into her shoulder, the sound raw and ugly. I gave them a moment, pretending to examine a first edition of Hemingway. When they finally pulled apart, Serafina looked at me. You must be the wife, she said, offering a sad smile. I saw the wedding photos in the paper. Madeline looked like she had swallowed a lemon. I am Avery, I said, shaking her hand. And we need to talk. Madeline is out of control. We sat in the back room of the shop, drinking herbal tea out of chipped mugs. I told her everything. The slap, the audit threat, the silence. Serafina listened, her face hardening. She hasn't changed, she said quietly. But there is something you need to know. Something she did to me after I left. She stood up and went to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. She slid it across the table to me. When I left, I thought I was just losing my inheritance, Serafina said. But a year later, debt collectors started calling. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans, personal loans, business loans, credit lines, all in my name. I opened the folder. My forensic eye scanned the documents immediately. The dates were from 14 years ago. The signatures were shaky. A poor imitation of the bold script Serafina used on the receipts in her shop. I never signed these, Serafina said. Madeline did. She forged my signature. She took out nearly $500,000 in my name to renovate the guest house I was never allowed to step foot in again. She destroyed my credit. It took me 10 years to clear my name, and I still can't get a mortgage. That is identity theft, I said, my mind racing. That is grand larceny and fraud. I couldn't prove it, Serafina said. She had the best lawyers. I was a broke 22-year-old working as a waitress. But there is something else, something she is terrified you will find. Serafina leaned in. lowering her voice. Grandfather Silas. He knew what Madeline was. He hated how she treated Arthur, and he hated how she treated me. Before he died, he created a contingency. A contingency? Julian asked. The Phoenix Trust, Serafina said. It is a blind trust, separate from the main estate. Grandfather set it up specifically for any grandchild who was wrongfully disenfranchised by the executor of his will. That means me. And now, it means your son, Leo. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A secret trust. Madeline found out about it 5 years ago, Serafina continued. She couldn't dissolve it because of the legal structure Silas used, but she found a back door. She created a shell company. She has been draining the trust. Avery. She is stealing from the very fund designed to protect the people she hurts. Do you know the name of the shell company? I asked, pulling out my laptop right there on the tea table. I think it is called the Vance Charity Foundation, Serafina said. I didn't waste a second. I tethered my laptop to my phone's hotspot and logged into my secure terminal. I bypassed the standard search engines and went straight into the state's registry of charitable organizations. Vance Charity Foundation. Status active. Directors, Madeline Vance. Preston Roche, her lawyer. I pulled the 990 tax forms. They were public record, but nobody looks at them unless they know what they are looking for. On the surface, it looked legitimate. Donations to community improvement, but I dug deeper. I traced the outgoing wire transfers. The money wasn't going to orphanages or museums. Look at this, I said, pointing to the screen. $50,000 to consulting services in Warwick, $20,000 to a urban planning advisory in Providence. I cross-referenced the addresses of these consultants. They matched the home addresses of 2 city council members and a zoning commissioner. She isn't spending the money on clothes, I realized, the horror of the scheme dawning on me. She is bribing them. Bribing them for what? Julian asked, looking over my shoulder. The estate, I said. The Hawthorns. The property taxes on that land are astronomical. The zoning laws should have forced her to subdivide the land 10 years ago to pay the debts. She is paying off the officials to freeze the zoning status and delay the tax collection. She is using the money Silas left for his grandchildren to keep the house she uses to abuse them. Julian stood up and walked to the window. He looked sick. I can't believe it. I mean, I knew she was strict. I knew she was obsessed with image. But bribery, forgery. She is a criminal. She is a desperate woman holding on to a kingdom that doesn't belong to her, I said. My laptop pinged, a high-priority alert. While we were driving, I had set a trap. I had traced the IP address of the person who tried to hack my cameras the night before. It led back to a private investigation firm in Boston called Argus Eyes. I had run a script to monitor their outgoing data packets. A new file had just been uploaded to their cloud server. The file name was subject_L_Caldwell_school. My blood ran cold. L. Caldwell, Leo. I didn't care about the legality anymore. I brute forced the password. It took 30 seconds. The folder opened. My hands shook as I clicked through the images. There was Leo walking into his school. There was Leo playing on the swings during recess. There was a photo of Leo dropping an ice cream cone on the sidewalk 3 days ago. And there was a report attached. Notes. Subject displays lack of coordination. Possible behavioral issues. Mother works long hours. Father figure passive. Recommend documenting unstable home environment for future custody petition. The world tilted on its axis. She wasn't just trying to scare us. She was building a case. She was going to try to take Leo away from me. She wanted to prove I was an unfit mother so she could gain custody not because she loved him, but to punish me. She wanted to own him like she owned the furniture. Julian, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Look at this. Julian turned from the window. He looked at the screen. He saw the photos of his stepson, taken from a long-range lens by a stranger hired by his mother. She is stalking him, Julian whispered. She is stalking an 8-year-old boy. She is preparing to sue for custody, I said. She wants to take him. She wants to destroy me by taking the only thing that matters. Julian's face changed. The fear that had defined his features for 30 years began to crack. Underneath it, for the first time, I saw genuine anger. Not annoyance, not frustration, rage. "She can't have him," Julian said. His voice was stronger now. "She destroyed Serafina's life. She tried to destroy mine. She is not touching Leo." I closed the laptop with a snap. I looked at Serafina, then at Julian. "I was going to handle this quietly," I said. "I was going to use the audit logs to force a settlement. I thought this was a civil dispute." I stood up and put on my coat. "But kidnapping, stalking, fraud. This isn't civil anymore. This is criminal." I looked at Julian. "I am not just going to sue her. Julian, I am going to put her in handcuffs. I am going to dismantle the Vance name brick by brick until there is nothing left but dust. Are you with me?" Julian looked at his sister, the woman he had lost for 15 years because of his mother's bigotry. He looked at the screen where his stepson was being hunted like prey. He took a deep breath. "I know the password to her private server at the house, the one she keeps offline." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then let's go hunting." The summons arrived at 9 in the morning, delivered not by a courier, but by a process server who looked like he spent his spare time bending steel bars. It wasn't a subpoena, though the weight of the cream-colored envelope suggested something just as litigious. It was an invitation to the Hawthorns for an immediate family mediation. The wording was polite, but the subtext was a declaration of war. Madeline Vance was done hiding in the dark. She was moving her pieces into the light. I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the collar of my navy blue blazer. I chose navy for a reason. In the psychology of negotiation, blue suggests stability and calm, a direct counter to the red-hot aggression I knew Madeline would bring to the table. Julian sat on the edge of the bed, tying his shoes. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked like a man marching to the gallows, not a son going to visit his mother. "You don't have to say anything," I told him, fixing a silver brooch to my lapel. "Just sit there. Just listen. Let her show you who she really is." The brooch wasn't just jewelry. It was a high-fidelity directional microphone with a battery life of 12 hours and enough storage to record a symphony. In the state of Rhode Island, only one party needs to consent to a recording for it to be legal. I consented. We arrived at the estate at 11 o'clock. The gates opened automatically, swallowing us into the manicured belly of the beast. The house loomed larger than I remembered. A fortress of gray stone against a bleak, overcast sky. We were ushered into the library, a room that smelled of old leather and older money. The setup was theatrical. Madeline sat behind a massive oak desk that had belonged to Silas Vance, positioning herself as the judge, jury, and executioner. To her right sat Preston Roche. I knew Roche by reputation. He was a corporate shark who cost $800 an hour and specialized in making problems and people disappear. He wore a suit that cost more than my first car and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Bella was lounging on a leather Chesterfield sofa, scrolling through her phone, looking bored but dangerous, and in the corner, strapped into his wheelchair, sat Arthur. He was staring at a globe, spinning it slowly with a trembling finger, lost in his own fragmented world. "Sit," Madeline commanded, pointing to two stiff-backed chairs positioned in front of the desk. We sat. The dynamic was clear. We were the naughty schoolchildren. She was the headmistress. Preston Roche cleared his throat. He opened a leather folder and slid a single piece of paper across the desk toward me. It was a check. I looked at the numbers. $500,000. "Madeline acts out of love," Roche began, his voice smooth like oiled gravel. "She recognizes that the incident at Thanksgiving was regrettable. Tensions were high, but she also recognizes that you and Julian are struggling, raising a child with special needs." "Leo does not have special needs," I interrupted, my voice cool. "He has asthma." Roche waved a hand dismissively. "The point remains. Madeline wants to secure the boy's future. This is an education trust. $500,000. It is yours. You can send him to the best boarding schools in the country. Get him the support he needs." I looked at the check, then at Madeline. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her manicured fingernails, feigning disinterest. But I saw the tightness in her jaw. She was terrified. This wasn't charity. It was a ransom payment for her reputation. "And the condition?" I asked. "A standard non-disclosure agreement," Roach said, sliding a thicker document across the desk. "And a waiver of liability. You agree that the incident was an accident. You drop any talk of an audit, and you acknowledge that you have no claim to review the family finances." I picked up the check. It felt light, flimsy. $500,000. It was enough money to change lives. It was also the price of my son's dignity. "You think you can buy me?" I asked, looking directly at Madeline. "I am buying peace, Avery," Madeline said, finally meeting my eyes. Her gaze was cold, reptilian. "Take the money. Go back to your little apartment. Raise the boy. Stop pretending you belong at this table." "Why?" I asked. I leaned forward slightly, angling the brooch toward her. "Why offer this much money for a simple accident? Madeline, if you did nothing wrong, why are you paying me?" "Because I want you to shut up," she snapped. "Is it because you feel guilty?" I pressed, "for hitting an 8-year-old child?" Roach placed a hand on Madeline's arm to silence her, but she shrugged him off. The narcissist in her couldn't resist the bait. She needed to be right more than she needed to be safe. "Guilt." Madeline laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "I don't feel guilty for disciplining a child who has no manners. He came into my house. He destroyed an heirloom, and he disrespected his betters. He is just a bastard. Avery, I slapped him to teach him his place. Someone had to do it since you clearly failed as a mother." The room went dead silent. The recording device on my lapel hummed silently, capturing every syllable. "He is just a bastard. I slapped him to teach him." I didn't react. I didn't flinch. But I looked at Julian. He was staring at his mother. His face was a mask of shock. For his entire life, he had convinced himself that his mother was strict but loving. He had told himself that she wanted the best for everyone, but there was no love in that sentence. There was only hatred, pure, unadulterated malice directed at an innocent boy. "Julian," Madeline said, noticing his stare. "Don't look at me like that. You know I am right. The boy is soft." Julian didn't speak. He looked down at his hands, and I saw his fists clench until the knuckles turned white. The cognitive dissonance in his brain was shattering. The image of the mother he worshipped was being overlaid with the monster sitting in front of him. I sat back, satisfied. I had the confession. Now for the checkmate. "I am not signing your NDA," I said, sliding the papers back across the desk. "And I am not taking your money." Roach's smile faltered. "Mrs. Caldwell, I suggest you reconsider. This is a very generous offer. If you choose to litigate, we will bury you. You have no resources. You have no standing." "Speaking of standing," I said, opening my briefcase, "you mentioned that I have no claim to review the family finances." "You don't," Madeline sneered. "You are a daughter-in-law. You are a legal stranger to the estate." "That is true," I agreed. "Avery Caldwell has no rights here, but—" I pulled out a document. It was a notarized power of attorney, signed yesterday morning in the back room of a bookstore in Wickford. "I am not here representing myself," I said, sliding the document to Roche. "I am here as the legal proxy for Serafina Vance." Madeline's face went slack. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly stunned. The name hung in the air like a curse. "Serafina," she whispered. "That is impossible." "It is very possible," I said. "Serafina is alive. She is well, and she has granted me full legal authority to act on her behalf regarding her interest in the Vance estate. And since you never legally removed her from the original deed of the trust, only the will she still has the right to demand a forensic accounting of all assets." Roche snatched the paper, reading it furiously, his brow furrowed. He looked at Madeline and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The document was ironclad. You have been draining the Phoenix Trust, I said, my voice rising in strength. You have been laundering money through the Vance Charity Foundation to bribe zoning officials. I know about the shell companies. I know about the bribes. And now, representing Serafina, I am officially demanding an audit of every single transaction from the last 15 years. Madeline stood up, her hands slamming onto the desk. You little witch! You dug up that traitor. She is dead to this family. She is the only decent Vance left, I retorted. Suddenly, a voice croaked from the corner. The horse. We all turned. Arthur was leaning forward in his wheelchair, his eyes surprisingly lucid for a moment. He was looking at me. Silas, Arthur wheezed. Silas told me. He hid the key. Inside the wooden horse. The belly of the horse. Oh, shut up. Arthur, Madeline yelled at him. He is hallucinating again. Nurse, get him out of here. A nurse hurried in from the hallway and began to wheel the confused old man away. But I locked eyes with Arthur as he passed. The wooden horse. It wasn't nonsense. It was a directive. I filed it away instantly. This meeting is over, Madeline hissed. Get out of my house. I stood up, gathering my things. We will see you in court, Madeline, and I will be bringing the FBI with me regarding the bribery charges. As I turned to leave, Bella, who had been silent, suddenly lunged forward. She grabbed a crystal decanter of red wine from the side table. You ruin everything, she screamed. She splashed the wine. It wasn't a clumsy spill. It was a targeted attack. The dark red liquid hit my chest, soaking into my silk blouse and the lapel of my navy blazer. It dripped down my front, cold and sticky. Julian jumped up. Bella, what is wrong with you? Bella smirked, looking satisfied. Oops, looks like you are trash inside and out now. I didn't wipe it off. I didn't cry. I looked down at the stain, then up at Bella. My pulse hadn't even jumped. Save your theatrics, Bella, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a razor. This dress is cheaper than your character. It can be cleaned. Your reputation cannot. I turned to Julian. We are leaving. Julian looked at his sister, then at his mother. For the first time, he didn't say goodbye. He walked to the door and held it open for me. Avery, Madeline's voice stopped me at the threshold. I turned back. She had regained her composure. She was smiling, but it was the smile of a predator who had one last trap to spring. You think you are so smart, she said softly. You think you can play in the big leagues because you found a few spreadsheets, but you forget who I know. I play bridge with the CEO of Vanguard Analytics. My stomach tightened. You have a review coming up, don't you? Madeline asked, tilting her head. It would be a shame if they found out that their star analyst was using company resources for a personal vendetta. It would be a shame if you were flagged as a security risk. You won't just lose this lawsuit, Avery. You will be unemployable. It was a valid threat. What I had done accessing the insurance logs, tracking the IP addresses, was ethically gray and potentially a violation of company policy. If she made the call, I could be fired by morning. I looked at her, realizing the depths of her depravity. She would starve her own grandchildren to keep her throne. Make the call, Madeline, I said, but you better hope you can dial faster than I can file the indictment. I walked out of the library, the wine clinging to my skin, the recording burning a hole in my pocket. The game had shifted. I wasn't just a pawn anymore. I was the queen she never saw coming. The call from Human Resources came at 8:45 on Monday morning. Just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee, the voice on the other end was clipped. Professional and apologetic, but the message was a sledgehammer. An anonymous complaint had been filed regarding my access to sensitive client data. They used words like compliance review and audit trail irregularities, but the subtext was clear. Madeline Vance had made her move. I was placed on immediate administrative leave without pay, pending an internal investigation. I hung up the phone and stared at the blank screen. I should have felt panic. I should have felt the crushing weight of impending unemployment. Instead, I felt a strange, icy clarity. By suspending me, Madeline had made a tactical error. She had assumed my job was my tether, that without it, I would crumble. She forgot that a job takes up 10 hours of my day. By taking it away, she had just gifted me 10 extra hours a day to hunt her down. She did it, didn't she? Julian asked from the kitchen doorway. He was holding a piece of toast he hadn't taken a bite of. She did, I said, placing my phone on the counter. I am suspended, which means I am free. Get your coat. Julian, we have a puzzle to solve. We didn't go to a lawyer's office. We went to the one place Madeline would never expect us to go back to the scene of the crime. I had spent the weekend obsessing over Arthur's whispered words in the library. The key is in the wooden horse. Most people would dismiss it as the ramblings of a decaying mind. But in my line of work, you learn that the subconscious holds on to truths that the conscious mind tries to bury. Arthur wasn't hallucinating. He was remembering. There is a rocking horse, Julian confirmed as we drove toward Newport. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that matched the turbulence inside the car. It is in the attic nursery. It has been there since I was a baby. I used to be terrified of it. It had these glass eyes that seemed to follow you. Is Madeline home? I asked. No, Julian said, checking his watch. Today is the Save the Coast luncheon. She is the chairperson. She will be at the country club until at least 4 o'clock. That gives us 2 hours. We parked the car a quarter of a mile down the road, hidden behind a thicket of overgrown hydrangeas. We walked the rest of the way, cutting through the wooded perimeter of the estate to avoid the main gate cameras. The house loomed ahead, silent and imposing. The alarm code, Julian whispered as we crouched by the side service entrance. She changes the main codes, but the service entrance code has been the birth year of her first corgi for 20 years, 1982. He punched in the numbers on the keypad. The light blinked green. Julian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since childhood. We are in, he said. The kitchen was empty, but we could hear the faint hum of a vacuum cleaner on the second floor. That would be Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. She had been with the Vances for 30 years and was as loyal to Madeline as a guard dog. You need to distract her. I told Julian. If she sees me, she calls Madeline instantly. If she sees you, she might just think you are visiting. Julian nodded. He looked pale, but there was a set to his jaw I hadn't seen before. Go to the attic. The stairs are behind the linen closet in the east wing. I will get Mrs. Gable into the solarium. He walked into the main hall, calling out, Mrs. Gable, I think I left my watch here on Thanksgiving. I waited until I heard the vacuum stop and the heavy footsteps of the housekeeper retreating toward the solarium. Then I moved. I slipped off my shoes to silence my footsteps and sprinted up the back servant stairs. The house smelled of lemon polish and stale lavender, the scent of a place that was preserved rather than lived in. I reached the 3rd floor, opened the hidden door behind the linen closet, and climbed the narrow wooden steps to the attic. The attic was a graveyard of memories. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light piercing through the dormer windows. Stacks of old paintings, furniture covered in white sheets, and boxes labeled by decade filled the space. And there, in the corner, stood the horse. It was magnificent and terrifying, hand-carved from dark walnut. It stood nearly 3 feet tall on rusted rockers. Its paint was chipped, revealing the dark wood beneath, and its glass eyes were indeed unsettlingly realistic. It stared at me with a malevolent intelligence. Okay, Silas, I whispered, approaching the wooden beast. Show me what you are hiding. I ran my hands over the cold wood. I checked the saddle, the ears, the rockers. Nothing. It felt solid. I knelt down and examined the belly. There was a faint seam in the wood, almost invisible to the naked eye, running along the underside. I pressed on the wood. It didn't budge. I tried sliding it. Nothing. Then I remembered the phrase, "The key is in the horse." I looked at the horse's mouth. It was slightly open, carved as if mid-neigh. I reached my finger inside the wooden mouth, at the back of the throat. I felt a small metal latch. I pulled it. With a soft click, The panel on the belly of the horse popped open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached into the hollow cavity. My fingers brushed against dusty velvet and then closed around two objects. I pulled them out. The first was a leather-bound notebook. The leather cracked and worn. The second was a small plastic case containing an SD card. I sat down on the dusty floorboards, my back against a trunk, and pulled out the tablet I had brought with me. I inserted the SD card into the adapter. A video file appeared, date modified October 12, 2019, 3 weeks before Silas died. I pressed play. Silas Vance appeared on the screen. He was sitting in his study, looking frail, an oxygen tube in his nose, but his eyes were sharp. "If you are watching this," Silas's voice rasped, "then Madeline has done exactly what I feared she would. She has declared Arthur incompetent." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, then continued. "I am recording this because my lawyer is compromised. Preston Roche is in Madeline's pocket. I cannot change my will officially without her knowing. So, I am leaving this codicil here, where only a Vance would look." He held up a document to the camera. "I, Silas Vance, being of sound mind, do hereby revoke all executive powers previously granted to Madeline Vance, the Phoenix Trust, and the control of the Hawthorne estate is to pass directly to my son, Arthur. However, should Arthur be incapacitated, control does not revert to my wife. It shall pass to the daughter-in-law who demonstrates the moral courage to protect this family's legacy. I define this moral courage as the willingness to expose the rot within, regardless of the cost." I froze. The daughter-in-law who demonstrates the moral courage. He didn't name a person. He named a character trait. He knew Madeline would destroy anyone who opposed her. So he created a test, by fighting her, by exposing the fraud. I had fulfilled the condition of the bequest. "Checkmate," I whispered. But the video wasn't done. "And to ensure my wife does not contest this," Silas continued, a bitter smile touching his lips, "I have left a record of her extracurricular activities in the diary. Use it only if you must. It will break Arthur's heart, but it will save his fortune." The screen went black. I picked up the diary. My hands were trembling. I opened it to a random page marked with a sticky note. August 14th, 1995. Transfer to account in Zurich. $75,000. Note: apartment rental for Jean-Paul. He says the view of the Alps inspires his painting. I told Arthur the money was for a roof repair on the summer cottage. I flipped another page. December 20th, 2001. Transfer $100,000. Note: Jean-Paul's gambling debt. He threatened to call the house. I had to pay. I told the boys we couldn't afford the ski trip this year because the market was down. I felt a wave of nausea. I wasn't reading accounting errors. I was reading the documentation of a betrayal that spanned decades. Madeline Vance, the woman who preached austerity and family honor, the woman who slapped my son for spilling sauce on a tablecloth, had stolen millions of dollars from her husband and children to support a lover in Europe. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, fast footsteps. Avery. It was Julian. He burst into the attic, his face flushed. "We have to go, now." "What happened?" I asked, scrambling to my feet and shoving the diary and SD card into my bag. "Mrs. Gable didn't buy it. She got suspicious when I wouldn't stay for tea. I think she texted Madeline. I just saw a black Mercedes pull into the driveway. It is her. She is early." "The front gate takes 2 minutes to open fully," I calculated. "We have 90 seconds before she walks through the front door." "We can't go down the main stairs," Julian said, panic rising in his voice. "She will see us." "The window," I said, pointing to the dormer. "There is a fire escape lattice on the side of the house, right?" "I haven't climbed that since I was 12, Julian said. "Then today is the day you feel young again," I said, grabbing his arm. We scrambled out the window. The wind whipped my hair across my face. The lattice was old iron, covered in ivy, slippery from the damp air. We climbed down as fast as we dared, the metal groaning under our weight. As my feet hit the wet grass of the backyard, I heard the heavy thud of the front door opening. "Mrs. Gable." Madeline's voice rang out, shrill and angry. "Why is there a car parked down the road?" "Run," I whispered. We sprinted toward the woods. We didn't look back. We tore through the hydrangeas, branches scratching at our faces, mud splashing onto our clothes. We reached my car just as the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. She had called the police. She knew someone had been there. I threw myself into the driver's seat. Julian dived into the passenger side. I jammed the key in the ignition and gunned the engine. As we sped away, putting distance between us and the gilded cage of the hawthorns, Julian looked at me. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. "Did we get it?" he asked. "Was there anything in the horse?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the diary. I tossed it onto his lap. "Read the entry from Christmas, 2001, I said. "Read why you didn't get to go skiing that year." Julian opened the book. I watched his face as he read. I watched the confusion turn to disbelief, and then to a profound, shattering hurt. "Jean-Paul," he whispered. "She told us. She told us Dad made bad investments. She told us we were poor." "She lied," I said, merging onto the highway. "She has been lying since before you were born. She stole your childhood to pay for her affair." Julian closed the book. He didn't cry. He looked out the window, and for the first time, I saw the boy inside the man die, replaced by something much harder, something much more dangerous to Madeline Vance. "Drive faster," Julian said, his voice cold steel. "I want to see her burn." "We are not just going to burn her, Julian," I said, gripping the wheel. "We are going to bury her under the weight of her own sins." The silence in our apartment following the escape from the Hawthorns was not peaceful. It was the pressurized silence of a submarine diving too deep. We knew she was coming. Madeline Vance was not a woman who delegated her own vengeance. Not when the betrayal came from inside the bloodline. She would not send lawyers for this. She would come herself to perform the vivisection. I sat at the kitchen table, the stolen diary and SD card locked in my fireproof safe, watching Julian pace. He had been pacing for an hour, wearing a trench in the rug. Every time a car drove by outside, he flinched. The man I had seen in the attic, the one with steel in his voice, was fracturing under the weight of 30 years of conditioning. "She knows," Julian muttered, stopping by the window. "I didn't latch the horse's belly perfectly. The moment she checks it, she will see the seam is misaligned. She knows it was me. Nobody else knew about the horse." "Let her come," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "We have the leverage now. Julian, we know about Jean-Paul. We know about the embezzlement." "You don't understand," he said, turning to me with haunted eyes. "She doesn't care about the money. She cares about control, and she has files on me too. Avery, files I've never told you about." Before I could ask what he meant, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a frantic ringing. It was a long, sustained press. Julian froze. He looked at the door like it was a portal to hell. "Open it," I said softly. "We stop hiding today." Julian walked to the door. His hand trembled as he turned the lock. Madeline stood in the hallway. She wasn't accompanied by police or security. She was alone. She was wearing a trench coat belted tightly at the waist, and her hair was slightly windblown, but it was her face that threw me off. She wasn't furious. She wasn't cold. She was crying. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Tears streamed down her cheeks, ruining her perfect foundation. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked smaller, older, fragile. "Julian," she choked out, stepping into the apartment and reaching for him. "Oh, my son, my poor, confused boy." Julian stiffened, but he didn't pull away when she embraced him. He stood there, arms at his sides, while his mother wept into his chest. "I am so sorry," Madeline sobbed, pulling back to cup his face in her hands. "I drove you to this. I was too hard on you. I know I was. But I did it because I love you so much. I wanted you to be strong." I watched from the kitchen, feeling a wave of revulsion. This was the most dangerous version of Madeline the martyr. "Cut the act, Madeline," I said, stepping into the living room. "We know about the money. We know about your lover in Zurich." She ignored me completely. She didn't even flick her eyes in my direction. Her entire universe was Julian. She was isolating the target. "I know what you found," Madeline said to Julian, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You found Silas's diary. You think I am a monster because I sent money to a friend, Julian. Your father. Arthur was not a husband to me. He was sick long before the diagnosis. I was lonely. I was so lonely. I did what I had to do to survive, just like I did what I had to do to protect you." Julian blinked. "Protect me." "Don't make me say it," she whispered, her eyes widening with feigned fear. "Don't make me bring up that night, the rain, the bicycle." The color drained from Julian's face so completely he looked like a corpse. He staggered back, hitting the wall. You said that was buried," Julian wheezed. "It is buried," Madeline insisted, moving closer, pressing her advantage. "I buried it. I paid the police chief. I paid the family. I spent $50,000 to make sure my 18-year-old son didn't go to prison for vehicular manslaughter. I wiped the blood off your bumper myself. Julian, do you remember I washed your car while you threw up in the garden?" I stepped forward, my mind racing. What is she talking about? Julian. Julian couldn't speak. He was hyperventilating. Madeline turned to me then, and the mask slipped just enough for me to see the viper beneath. "He didn't tell you." "Of course not. My son. The saint. When he was 18, he was driving home from a party. Drunk. He hit a girl on a bike. He panicked and drove home. A hit and run. I saved him. I fixed it. I have the police report in my safe. Avery, the original one, before I had it replaced." She turned back to Julian. "I saved your life. I have protected you every single day since then. And this is how you repay me by stealing from me by siding with her." "You didn't save me," Julian whispered, tears leaking from his eyes. "You told me she was fine. You told me it was just a broken leg." "I lied to give you peace," Madeline cried. "But if you release those files about the trust, if you drag my name through the mud, I will release the police report. I will tell the world what you did. You won't just lose your inheritance, Julian. You will go to jail. And you," she pointed a manicured finger at me, "will be the wife of a felon." The room spun. This was her leverage. This was why Julian had been a ghost in his own life for 13 years. He was living under the guillotine, and she held the rope. Julian looked at me, his eyes begging for forgiveness. "I wanted to tell you. I was just a kid. I was so scared." "Julian," Madeline said, her voice soft and hypnotic. "Come home. Leave this mess. Leave her. We can fix this. We can be a family again. Just give me the diary." He wavered. I saw it happen. The fear was a deep, primal thing. He took a step toward her. "No," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was absolute. I walked over and stood between them, breaking the invisible cord she was pulling. "You are not going with her, Julian." "Avery, she has the evidence," Julian said, his voice cracking. "I can't go to jail. I can't leave you and Leo. You are already in jail." I grabbed his shoulders and shook him. "Look at yourself. You have been in a prison of her making since you were 18. She didn't save you because she loved you. She saved you so she could own you. She kept that evidence for 13 years just for this moment." "I can't," Julian sobbed. "You can," I said, "because if you go with her now, you are sacrificing Leo. Do you understand? If you fold, she wins. She takes the trust. She takes custody. She destroys our son." The door opened behind us. We hadn't heard the key turn. Leo walked in. He was home early from school. But it wasn't the happy, energetic entry of an 8-year-old. He walked slowly, his head down. "Mom," he asked, his voice small. I turned, and my heart shattered. Leo's shirt was torn at the collar. His glasses were bent, and there was a fresh, angry scratch running down his forearm. Leo. I rushed to him, dropping to my knees. What happened? Some kids at recess, Leo sniffled, trying to be brave. They pushed me off the slide. They said my grandmother told their moms that I am a mistake. They said I am a bastard and my dad isn't my real dad. He looked at Julian. Julian, are you my dad? The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Julian looked at the boy. He saw the torn shirt. He saw the confusion and the pain caused by the poison his mother had injected into the community. He looked at Madeline. Madeline looked at Leo with cold indifference. Well, she said, adjusting her coat, children can be cruel when they sense weakness. That was the moment. I saw the change in Julian's eyes. It wasn't a flicker. It was a supernova. The fear that had held him hostage for 13 years evaporated, burned away by a father's rage. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He straightened his back. He seemed to grow 3 inches. He walked over to Leo and knelt down. He gently straightened Leo's glasses. I am your dad, Julian said, his voice steady as a rock. I am your dad, and nobody is ever going to hurt you again. He stood up and turned to Madeline. Get out, Julian said. Madeline blinked. Excuse me. Get out of my house, Julian repeated, and take your threats with you. I don't care about the police report. Release it. Send it to the Times. I don't care. You are bluffing, Madeline sneered, though she took a step back. You wouldn't dare. You are a coward, Julian. You always have been. I was a coward, Julian corrected, because I thought I had something to lose. But I realized something today. I would rather rot in a cell for 10 years than let you spend 1 more minute near my son. He walked to the door and threw it open. Go. Madeline stared at him. She looked for the crack in his armor, the hesitation she had exploited for decades. She found none, for the first time in her life. She had no power here. She gathered her coat, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom. You will regret this. By tomorrow morning, you will be nothing. She stormed out. Julian slammed the door. He didn't collapse. He didn't shake. He turned to me. Where are the car keys? Where are you going? I asked. To finish it, he said. She thinks she holds the cards because of the accident. I am going to take the deck away. He kissed me on the forehead, hard and fast. He hugged Leo. Then he grabbed the keys and walked out. I didn't stop him. I watched him go to the window. He didn't drive toward Newport. He drove toward the precinct. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Julian. It is done, he said. His voice sounded exhausted but lighter, as if he were floating. Where are you? I am at the station. I just walked out of the interview room. What happened? I asked, gripping the phone. I confessed, Julian said. I told them everything. The party, the rain, the girl on the bike, the cover-up. And the detective looked it up, Julian said, and I could hear the bitter laugh in his voice. Avery, there was no hit and run. There was no girl on a bike. I froze. What? The accident report from that night. It was for a collision with a mailbox. I hit a brick mailbox. I was drunk. Yes, I passed out. When I woke up, Mother told me I had hit a girl. She told me she paid the family off. She gaslit me. Avery, for 13 years. She let me believe I had killed someone just so she could own me. There is no crime. There is no manslaughter. I am free. Tears streamed down my face. The cruelty of it was bottomless. She had tortured her own son with a phantom crime just to ensure he never left her orbit. She is a monster, I whispered. Yes, Julian said. She is, and now I am going to destroy her. Come home, I said. Not yet, Julian said. I am parked outside the server farm for Vanguard Analytics. I need you to call your friend in IT, the one who owes you a favor. Why? Because I know the master password for Madeline's private cloud, Julian said. The one she uses for the Vance Charity Foundation. It isn't password 123. It is the date she convinced me I was a murderer. 11,041,998. Julian, if we hack that server, there is no going back. Good, he said. "I don't want to go back. I want to burn the bridges so we can see the fire." By the time Julian returned home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor, but the darkness didn't feel scary anymore. It felt like the cover we needed to work. He walked in, tossed his jacket on the chair, and sat down next to me at the dining table where my laptop was open. He looked at the screen, then at me. "She tried to break us," Julian said, taking my hand. "She thought fear was stronger than love." I squeezed his hand. She was wrong. "Log in," Julian commanded. I typed in the username mvance_admin. I typed in the password 11041998. The screen loaded. A green progress bar filled the screen. Access granted. We were in. The shadow ledger, the bribery emails, the medical forgery documents. It was all there, laid out in digital folders. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number for the FBI field office in Providence. "Hello," I said when the agent answered. "My name is Avery Caldwell. I have evidence of a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme, wire fraud, and the bribery of public officials involving the Vance estate, and I would like to speak to someone immediately." I looked at Julian. He wasn't looking at the floor. He wasn't looking at his mother's picture. He was looking at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully on the couch with a bandage on his arm. The awakening was over. The reckoning had begun. The digital satisfying click of the enter key unlocking Madeline's private server felt less like opening a door and more like detonating a controlled demolition. We were sitting at my dining table, the remains of a cold takeout dinner pushed to the side, illuminated only by the harsh blue light of 3 monitors. Julian sat next to me, his face pale but his eyes hard, watching the progress bar load the shadow ledger his mother had kept hidden for 2 decades. "We are in," I said, my voice flat and professional. The forensic analyst in me took over, pushing aside the wife and mother. I wasn't Avery Caldwell anymore. I was the hunter. The file structure was deceptively simple. Folders were named with innocuous labels like garden maintenance and historical preservation. But when I opened garden maintenance, I wasn't looking at receipts for mulch or hydrangeas. I was looking at a complex web of wire transfers routing through shell companies in Delaware, then bouncing to the Isle of Man, and finally resting in numbered accounts in Zurich. "This is not just embezzlement," I murmured, scrolling through the metadata of a transaction dated 3 years ago. "Julian, look at this. The inflow comes from a company called Apex Global based in Panama. The outflow goes to the Vance Charity Foundation. She is not just stealing from the trust. She is washing money." Julian leaned in, squinting at the screen. "Washing, you mean money laundering." "Exactly," I said, highlighting a column of figures. "Apex Global is a known front for white-collar racketeering. I have seen them flagged in Interpol databases. Madeline is taking dirty money, filtering it through the family foundation under the guise of donations, and then paying it back out as consulting fees to clean it. She is taking a 20% cut." I did the math in my head. Over the last 10 years, the volume was staggering. "She has moved nearly $15 million, I said. "This is federal. This is RICO territory. She isn't just a thief. She is a banker for criminals." But the financial crimes, as heinous as they were, paled in comparison to what I found in the folder marked Arthur_medical. I opened a PDF scanned in 2013. It was a competency evaluation signed by a doctor, Eris Thorne. It declared Arthur Vance legally incompetent due to advanced dementia, granting Madeline full power of attorney over his assets and health care. "Wait," Julian said, his voice trembling. "Dad was fine in 2013. He was still driving. He was still playing chess. He didn't start forgetting names until 2018. I pulled up the metadata of the document. The scan date was authentic, but I cross-referenced the doctor's name. Doctor. Thorne had lost his medical license in 2015 for prescription fraud. "She bought the diagnosis," I said, the realization settling in my stomach like lead. "She paid a crooked doctor to declare your father incompetent 5 years before he actually got sick. She stole 5 years of his life. Julian, She took control of the estate while he was still lucid because she knew he was planning to give the Phoenix Trust to Serafina. The doorbell rang, sharp and urgent. I checked the security feed. It was Serafina. She looked windblown and exhausted, holding a rusted metal box against her chest. We let her in, and she bypassed the pleasantries, slamming the box onto the table next to my laptop. "I went to the old boathouse," Serafina said, breathing hard. "I remembered I used to hide things there. I found these." She opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters, the envelopes yellowed with age, all addressed to Serafina Vance, care of the Dusty Spine. "Dad wrote to me," Serafina said, tears welling in her eyes. "He wrote to me every month for 10 years. He begged me to come home. He told me he loved Marcus. He told me he was proud of me." She picked up a letter, her hand shaking. "Madeline intercepted them. She never mailed them, and she intercepted the letters I sent to him. She told Dad I hated him. She told him I burned his letters. She manufactured a silence between us to break his heart so he would be too weak to fight her." I took one of the letters. It was physical proof of alienation of affection, but combined with the forged medical records, it was the final nail in the coffin of Madeline's defense. It proved malice. It proved a systematic, decade-long conspiracy to isolate and control the principal asset holder. "We have enough," I said. I closed the laptop lid. "Call Elena." Elena Rostova was not a warm woman. She was a weapon in a tailored suit. We met her at her office in downtown Providence at 6 in the morning. The city was still waking up, but Elena looked like she had been awake for days, fueled by espresso and the prospect of destroying a tyrant. She laid the documents out on her glass conference table: the shadow ledger, the forged medical evaluation, the intercepted letters, the video of Silas Vance. Elena read in silence for 20 minutes. When she finally looked up, her smile was terrifying. "This is beautiful," she said. "I expected a civil suit, maybe a breach of fiduciary duty. But this Avery, this is a masterclass in corruption. We are not just suing her. We are going to incinerate her." "What is the play?" Julian asked. "We file in federal court," Elena said, tapping the folder with a manicured fingernail. "We hit her with everything at once: embezzlement, wire fraud, tax evasion, forgery, identity theft, and, thanks to the video of the slap and the photos of the bruise, assault on a minor. She will try to run," I warned. "She has accounts in the Caymans. I saw the routing numbers." "Let her try," Elena said, pulling a document from her briefcase. "I have already drafted an ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order and an asset freeze. We go to the judge at 9 o'clock. By 10 o'clock, her accounts will be frozen. She won't be able to buy a pack of gum, let alone a plane ticket." Elena moved with the precision of a surgeon. By noon, the lawsuit was filed. Caldwell and Vance versus Madeline Vance. The PDF of the complaint was 60 pages long. At 1 in the afternoon, my laptop pinged with an alert. I had set up a tripwire on the shadow ledger. "Alert outgoing wire transfer initiated. Amount $10 million. Destination Cayman Islands, Holdings." "She is moving," I said, typing furiously. "She knows. She is trying to liquidate the main operating account." "Elena," I said into my phone, which was already on speaker. "She is initiating the transfer right now. 10 million. "Hold on," Elena said. I heard the rustle of papers and the banging of a gavel in the background. "Judge just signed it, sending the freeze order to the bank. Now." I watched the screen. The progress bar on the transfer was at 40%, 50%. "Come on," I thought. "Not this time, Madeline." 60%. Then, the bar turned red. "Transaction failed. Account frozen by court order case number 4492. "Got her," I whispered. The phone rang almost instantly. It wasn't Madeline. It was Bella. I stared at the screen. Bella, who had poured wine on me. Bella, who had mocked my son. She was calling me. I put it on speaker. "Avery." Bella's voice was high, pitched with panic. "Avery, please don't hang up."
"What do you want, Bella?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion.
Mom is freaking out, Bella whispered. She is smashing things in the office. She says the accounts are locked. She says you did this.
"I did," I confirmed.
Listen, Avery, Bella said, her voice dropping. I didn't know. I didn't know about the money laundering. I didn't know about the forgery. I just thought she was strict. I can help you. I can testify. I can tell the court how she treated us. I can be your witness. I looked at Julian. He shook his head slowly.
"You want a deal," I said. "You realize the ship is sinking, and you are trying to find a lifeboat."
I am your sister-in-law, Bella cried. We are family. I can help you take her down faster. Just promise me. Promise me my trust fund won't be touched. I have debts. Avery, I need that money. A cold smile touched my lips. It was exactly what I expected. Transactional to the end.
"Bella," I said,
Leaning into the phone. You watched your mother slap my 8-year-old son, and you laughed. You poured wine on me to humiliate me. You are not a victim here. You are an accomplice. But I can help.
"I don't need your help," I said. "I have the evidence. I have the truth. And as for your offer, loyalty is not something you can sell when the market price drops. You picked your side. Now you can drown with her." I hung up the phone.
The rest of the day was a blur of legal motions and affidavits. We didn't sleep. We stayed at Elena's office, preparing for the inevitable counterattack. But the counterattack never came. Madeline was too busy trying to plug the holes in a dam that had already burst. At 6 the next morning, the sun began to rise over Newport, casting a pale, cold light over the cliffs. We parked my car at the edge of the public road overlooking the Hawthorns. We weren't the only ones there. 2 black SUVs with federal government plates were idling at the gate. A local police cruiser was blocking the exit.
"Is that them?" Julian asked.
That is the FBI, I said. White-collar crimes division. Elena sent over the evidence of the Apex Global laundering yesterday afternoon. They don't wait around for subpoenas when there is a flight risk involving $10 million. We watched as the gates opened, not because Madeline buzzed them in, but because an agent stepped out and used a bolt cutter on the electronic lock. The convoy moved up the long, winding driveway. We watched from a distance as the agent swarmed the house. It was like watching an anthill being kicked over. Lights flickered on in every window. Figures moved past the glass. 10 minutes later, the front door opened. Madeline Vance was led out. She wasn't wearing her signature Chanel suit. She was wearing a silk robe, hastily tied. Her hair was unkempt. Her hands were behind her back. I raised my binoculars. The silver handcuffs glinted in the morning sun. She wasn't walking with the haughty grace of the Queen of Newport. She was being escorted, firmly, by 2 agents who didn't care about her last name. She looked small. She looked confused. She looked toward the gate, and for a second, I imagined she could see us. "She is gone," Julian whispered. They put her in the back of the SUV. Then, agents began bringing out boxes, box after box of files, computers, and hard drives. They were stripping the house to the bone. Bella was led out next. She wasn't in handcuffs, but she was crying, talking frantically to an agent who was writing everything down in a notebook. "It is over," I said, lowering the binoculars. "No," Julian said, starting the car. "This is just the arrest. Now comes the trial. Now we have to tell the world what she did." I looked at him. The man who had been afraid of his own shadow was now ready to stand in the spotlight and speak the truth. "You are right," I said. "Let's go get breakfast. We have a deposition to prepare for." As we drove away, the sun finally broke through the clouds, illuminating the ocean, the Hawthorns, once a symbol of untouchable power, was now just a crime scene taped off with yellow plastic. The empire hadn't just cracked. It had crumbled into the sea, and we were the ones who had pulled the pin. The conference room at the law offices of Rostova and Associates was designed to intimidate. It was a glass cage suspended 40 floors above Providence, with a view of the harbor that usually cost $500 an hour to look at, but today, the view was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the long, polished mahogany table that separated two warring factions of the Vance dynasty. This was the deposition. In civil litigation, this is usually a dry affair, a fact-finding mission where lawyers ask endless questions about dates and times. But we weren't just here for facts. We were here for a demolition. I sat next to Elena, my hands folded on top of a thick binder of evidence. To my right sat Julian. He looked tired, the dark circles under his eyes a testament to the sleepless nights since the FBI raid. But his posture was rigid. He wasn't the slumped, defeated man of last week. He was a sentry guarding the gates. On the other side sat Madeline Vance. She had been released on a $2 million bond pending trial, an amount she had scrambled to secure by leveraging her jewelry collection since her accounts were frozen. She walked in wearing a white suit, pristine and sharp, her hair helmeted in hairspray. She held her head high, offering a tight, pitying smile to the room. It was a masterclass in denial. She was trying to project the image of a matriarch indulging the tantrums of ungrateful children. But I saw the tremor in her hands. I saw the way her eyes darted to the camera recording the proceedings. She was terrified. Next to her was Preston Roche. He looked less like a shark today and more like a man realizing he was swimming in chum. He shuffled his papers nervously, avoiding eye contact with Elena. "We are on the record," the videographer announced. Preston Roche leaned forward, buttoning his jacket. He decided to start with aggression. It was a predictable strategy to discredit the accuser to invalidate the accusation. "Ms. Caldwell," Roach began, his voice dripping with faux politeness, "let us establish a baseline for your involvement in this family. You met Julian 4 years ago at a coffee shop, correct? You were a single mother at the time, struggling, I assume?" "I was a senior analyst," I replied calmly. "I was making 6 figures. I paid for my own coffee." Roche smirked. "Of course, but let us be honest. Marrying a Vance is a significant step up from a walk-up apartment in South Boston. Is it not true that you have always resented Madeline's oversight of the family finances? Is it not true that this entire audit is simply a tantrum because she refused to fund your son's private school tuition?" "Objection," Elena said lazily. "Argumentative." "I will answer," I said, cutting Elena off. I looked directly at Madeline. "I don't resent Madeline's oversight. Mr. Roche, I resent her criminality. And regarding my son, I don't need the Vance fortune to raise him. I just need him to be safe from physical assault." Roche chuckled, waving a hand. "Ah, yes, the alleged slap, a chaotic Thanksgiving dinner, a clumsy child, a grandmother trying to restore order. It is a he said, she said situation. Ms. Caldwell, hardly the crime of the century." "It is not he said, she said," I corrected him. I signaled to the videographer. "Please play Exhibit A." Madeline frowned. "What is this?" The security cameras were off. I turned them off myself before the guests arrived. "You did." Julian spoke up for the first time, his voice deep and resonating. "But after you went upstairs to change for dinner, I turned them back on, because I had a feeling you would be you." Madeline's head snapped toward Julian. The betrayal in her eyes was absolute. The large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. The resolution was crisp. It showed the dining room at the Hawthorns. It showed the heavy silver sauce boat tipping. It showed the splash of red on white lace. And then, it showed Madeline. On the screen, her face contorted into a mask of pure hate. We watched her march around the table. We watched her arm draw back. And then, the sound filled the silent conference room. Crack! It was louder on the recording than I remembered. It was a sickening, meaty sound of flesh on flesh. We watched Leo fly out of his chair. We watched him crumble to the floor. Roche winced. He actually looked away from the screen. Even a lawyer with no moral compass has a limit, and watching an elderly woman strike an 8-year-old boy seemed to find it. Madeline stared at the screen, her face pale. She didn't look remorseful. She looked angry that she had been caught. "The footage has been authenticated," I said, sliding a report across the table. "Assault on a minor,
That is a felony. Madeline. He was being disrespectful, Madeline snapped, breaking her silence. I was disciplining him. That is my right as the head of this house. You are not the head of the house, I said coolly. You are the trustee, and a trustee has a fiduciary duty, which brings us to the next point.
I opened my binder. Mr. Roche, you called my client a gold digger. Let us talk about where the gold actually went.
I pulled out a spreadsheet. It was color-coded.
This is a summary of the consulting fees paid by the Vance Charity Foundation over the last 10 years. I said, $3 million to a firm in Panama called Apex Global, $5 million to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Mr. Roche, can you explain why a charity dedicated to historical preservation is paying millions to an entity flagged by Interpol for money laundering? Roche's face went gray. He grabbed the spreadsheet. I have never seen this. These documents are obtained illegally. They were obtained from the server Madeline Vance used to run her criminal enterprise, Elena interjected. And since we have a federal warrant, they are perfectly admissible. I looked at Madeline. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. You thought you were so clever, I said to her. You thought because you used a complex routing number, nobody would notice, but you forgot one thing. Madeline, I am not just a daughter-in-law. I am a forensic analyst. I read ledgers like you read society columns. I trace the money. You don't know what you are talking about, Madeline hissed. That money was for international investments. Really? I asked. Then explain this. I played the next clip. It was the audio recording from the library meeting. The quality was crystal clear. Madeline's voice, it is just a bastard. I slapped him to teach him his place. The silence in the room was suffocating. Is that how you talk about your investments? I asked. Or is that how you talk about your grandson? Roche looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. He whispered something to Madeline, likely telling her to invoke her Fifth Amendment right. But she shook him off. Her ego was bruising, and she was fighting back the only way she knew how, with venom. He is a bastard, Madeline shouted, abandoning the white suit persona. He is not a Vance. He has no blood claim to the money. I was protecting the legacy. Protecting the legacy, I repeated. Is that what you were doing when you sent $100,000 to Jean-Paul within Zurich in 2001? Madeline froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was as if I had reached across the table and slapped her myself. Who? Roche asked, confused. Jean-Paul, I said, pulling a copy of the diary page from the binder. Her lover, an artist living in Switzerland, for 20 years. Madeline Vance siphoned money from the family estate, money that should have gone to Julian's education, money that should have paid the taxes, and sent it to her boyfriend in Europe. I slid the bank transfer records across the table. You let your family live in fear of poverty, I said, my voice rising. You told Julian he couldn't go on ski trips. You told Arthur they had to sell off land, all while you were funding a villa in the Alps for a man who wasn't your husband. Madeline stood up. She was shaking violently now. You shut up, you filthy little spy. You don't know anything about love. Arthur was a bore. He was useless. I deserved a life. She turned on Roche, grabbing him by the lapels of his expensive suit. Do something. Stop her. Why am I paying you? Madeline, sit down, Roche pleaded, trying to pry her fingers off his jacket. You are making it worse. I am not making it worse, she screamed. They are lying. They are twisting everything. We are not twisting anything, a new voice said. The door to the conference room opened. A nurse pushed a wheelchair into the room. In the chair sat Arthur Vance. He looked frail, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, but his eyes were open. He had been having a good day, a rare day of clarity. Julian had spent the morning with him, showing him photos, talking to him, grounding him in the present. Madeline gasped. She looked at her husband as if seeing a ghost. Arthur, she whispered, what are you doing here? You are sick. You shouldn't be here. Elena stood up. Mister, Vance has insisted on being present, and as he is the primary victim of your alleged fraud, he has that right. Arthur looked at Madeline. He looked at the woman he had been married to for 40 years. He looked at the white suit, the diamonds, the rage. He lifted a trembling hand. He pointed a finger, crooked with arthritis, directly at her face.
Jean-Paul, Arthur rasped. Madeline flinched. I knew, Arthur said, his voice weak but distinct. I always knew.
You didn't know anything, Madeline cried, tears of frustration streaming down her face. You were senile. You were checking out. No, Arthur said. You stole the money. You stole my son. He looked at Julian with infinite sadness, then back at Madeline. His eyes hardened. Thief, Arthur said. The word hung in the air like a judgment from God. Thief, he repeated, louder this time. You are a thief. Madeline broke. The pressure of the lawsuit, the freezing of her assets, the public humiliation, and now, the judgment of the husband she deemed useless. It was too much. Her narcissism collapsed in on itself. I had to take it, she shrieked, slamming her hands onto the table. I had to take control. You were weak, Arthur. You were going to give it all to Serafina. You were going to give the trust to that ungrateful girl and leave the estate to ruin. The stenographer's fingers flew across the keyboard. I saved this family, Madeline yelled, her voice echoing off the glass walls. I forged the will because you were too soft to do what was necessary. I signed the competency papers because you wouldn't cut Serafina off. I did it for the Vances. The room went dead silent. Preston Roche closed his eyes and dropped his head into his hands. It was the gesture of a man who had just lost his career. Elena looked at me and smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. Did you get that? Elena asked the stenographer. Yes, ma'am, the stenographer replied. I forged the will because you were too soft. It is on the record. Madeline looked around the room, breathing heavily. The realization of what she had just said crashed down on her. She had confessed, in a sworn deposition, on video. She slumped back into her chair, the fight draining out of her instantly. She looked small. She looked old. The empire wasn't just crumbling, it had been atomized. Madeline stammered. I meant, it doesn't matter what you meant. Mrs. Vance, Elena said, closing her folder with a definitive snap. You just admitted to felony forgery and fraud. The deposition is over. I stood up. I walked over to Arthur and placed a hand on his shoulder. He looked up at me and smiled. A genuine, lucid smile. Thank you, he whispered. I looked back at Madeline. She was staring at the table, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. She was alone. Truly, completely alone. Come on, Julian, I said. Let's take your father home. Julian stood up. He looked at his mother one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only pity. Goodbye, mother, he said. We walked out of the glass cage, leaving Madeline Vance sitting in the wreckage of her own hubris, with only a lawyer who despised her for company. The storm had passed, and the air was finally clean. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, but the chair at the defendant's table remained conspicuously empty. The air in the courtroom was thick with the murmurs of reporters and the restless shuffling of legal aides. Elena checked her watch. Her brow furrowed. Madeline Vance had surrendered her passport as a condition of her bail, but a woman who had spent 40 years laundering money for international cartels knew that a passport was just a piece of paper, easily replaced for the right price. She is not coming, Julian whispered, gripping the edge of the table. She is running. My phone vibrated against the wood of the table. It was a high-priority alert from the forensic tracking software I had installed on the Vance Industries server. I looked at the screen, and my blood ran cold. Alert high-volume asset liquidation detected. Elena, I said, sliding the phone to her. Look at the stock ticker. Vance Industries is tanking. Madeline wasn't just running. She was scorching the earth behind her. She was dumping her controlling stake in the family company, selling off millions of shares at a fraction of their value to generate untraceable liquid cash. She was willing to bankrupt the legacy she claimed to protect just to ensure she didn't leave empty-handed.
She is crashing the price, Elena hissed. If she dumps 50% of the shares, the company will be insolvent by noon. Thousands of people will lose their jobs.
I watched the red numbers plummet on the screen. The stock price dropped from $40 a share to $20, then to $15. It was a fire sale. But then, something miraculous happened. At exactly 10:30, the sell-off stopped. The trading screen froze. A notification popped up, flashing green. System override. Silas protocol activated. Condition met. Asset devaluation exceeding 40% by executor. Action automatic transfer of control.
I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. What is the Silas protocol?
I opened the digital copy of the diary we had found in the wooden horse. I scrolled frantically to the appendix, a section I had glossed over, thinking it was just legal jargon.
There it was, the dead man's switch.
Silas Vance had known his wife better than anyone. He knew that if she were ever cornered, she would burn the kingdom down rather than let someone else rule it. So he had embedded a poison pill in the corporate bylaws, hidden under layers of legalese in the 1998 restructuring. If the executor of the estate attempts to sell more than 30% of the company assets below market value, the executor is immediately stripped of all voting rights, and ownership of the controlling interest transfers automatically to the Phoenix Trust. Madeline had just tried to cash out. Instead, she had triggered the trap. By trying to destroy the company, she had legally handed 51% of Vance Industries to the very entity she had been stealing from. "She just gave the company to Serafina," I whispered, a smile breaking through my tension. "She doesn't know it yet, but she just made Serafina the majority owner of Vance Industries."
"We have to catch her," Julian said, standing up. "Where is she?"
"She is dumping the stock," I reasoned, my mind racing. "That means she needs to be somewhere she can access a non-extradition flight immediately. She wouldn't go to Logan. Too much security."
T.F. Green, Julian said. "The private airfield on the south side. She has used it for the charity galas."
We ran out of the courtroom, ignoring the shouts of the reporters. Elena was already on the phone with the FBI agent in charge of the case, shouting coordinates. We drove to the airfield in silence, Julian pushing my SUV to 80 miles an hour. The airfield was a small, exclusive strip of tarmac surrounded by chain-link fences and scrub pine. As we skidded into the parking lot, we saw the flashing lights of federal vehicles already surrounding a sleek Gulfstream jet. We got out and ran toward the fence. It was a scene of chaotic justice. Madeline was standing at the base of the jet's stairs. She was clutching a Louis Vuitton duffel bag to her chest like a shield. 2 FBI agents had their weapons drawn, not pointed at her, but lowered, ready. "Mrs. Vance," the lead agent shouted over the roar of the jet engines. "Step away from the aircraft."
"You cannot touch me," Madeline screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "I am a private citizen. I have rights. I am leaving on a scheduled vacation."
"You are violating your bail conditions," the agent yelled back. "Put the bag down." Madeline looked at the pilot, who was standing in the doorway of the plane, looking terrified. "Take off," she commanded. "I will pay you double. Take off now." The pilot shook his head and raised his hands, stepping back into the cabin and closing the door. He wasn't going to prison for her. Madeline turned back to the agents. She reached into her bag. For a split second, I thought she had a gun, but she pulled out a thick stack of cash. It must have been $50,000 in $100 bills. "Here!" she yelled, throwing the money onto the tarmac. The wind caught the bills, scattering them like confetti across the gray pavement. Take it all. Just let me go." It was pathetic. It was the last gasp of a woman who believed that money was the only law that mattered. She truly thought she could bribe federal agents in broad daylight. The agents moved in. They didn't scramble for the cash. They tackled her gently but firmly, forcing her hands behind her back. The duffel bag dropped, spilling more cash and several passports onto the ground.
"Madeline Vance, you are under arrest," the agent said, reciting the Miranda rights we all knew by heart. Madeline lifted her head. She saw us standing by the fence. She saw Julian. Her face twisted. She didn't look like a mother looking at her son. She looked like a demon looking at an exorcist. She screamed something, but the wind stole the words. A news helicopter hovered overhead, its camera trained on the woman in the white suit being handcuffed on the tarmac. The image was broadcast live. The Queen of Newport, the untouchable matriarch, was being led away like a common criminal. 2 days later, Julian went to see her. She was being held at the Maximum Security Detention Center in Cranston, pending her transfer to federal prison. The judge had revoked her bail entirely after the flight attempt. I went with him, but I waited by the door of the visitation room. This was a conversation that needed to happen between mother and son. Through the reinforced glass, I watched them. Madeline was wearing an orange jumpsuit. It clashed horribly with her pale skin. Her hair was flat, stripped of the expensive products and styling. She looked 20 years older than she had just 48 hours ago. She picked up the phone receiver on her side of the glass. Julian picked up his. I couldn't hear her, but I could read her lips. She wasn't apologizing. She was spitting words. Ungrateful, stupid, traitor. Julian sat there, calm and immovable. He let her vent. He let her pour out the last of her poison. Then he spoke. I didn't betray you. Mother, Julian said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. I freed us. I freed Serafina. I freed Dad. And I freed myself. Madeline slammed her hand against the glass. The guard stepped forward, warning her. You are nothing without me, she screamed, her voice faint through the thick partition. I made you, I own you. You owned a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. Julian said, You owned a scared boy, but that boy grew up. He stood up. He didn't look back. He placed the receiver gently back on the hook. Madeline kept screaming, mouthing curses, hammering on the glass. But Julian walked away. He walked out of the room, past me, and into the sunlight of the parking lot. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air that didn't taste like fear. Are you okay? I asked, taking his hand. I am, he said, and for the first time in 4 years, I believed him. The fallout continued. Bella was brought in for questioning the next day. The forensic audit revealed that she had knowingly accepted funds from the Vance Charity Foundation to pay off her gambling debts. She wasn't just a bystander. She was a beneficiary of the fraud. She was charged with conspiracy and receipt of stolen property. Her trust fund was seized as part of the asset forfeiture. The last I heard, she was trying to sell her designer wardrobe on the internet to pay for a public defender. But there was one final secret left to uncover. A week after the arrest, I was cleaning out the nursery in our apartment. We were packing up to move. We didn't want to stay in the city anymore. We wanted a fresh start, perhaps in a house with a yard for Leo, far away from the shadows of Newport. I picked up the old teddy bear that sat on the top shelf of Leo's closet. It was a dusty brown bear with one missing eye. Madeline had brought it over the night she came to apologize, the night she tried to gaslight Julian. She had handed it to Leo with a sneer, calling it a family heirloom she had found in the attic. Leo had never played with it. He sensed the bad energy attached to it. I was about to toss it into the donation bin when I felt something crinkle inside the stuffing. It felt like paper, but denser. I took a pair of scissors and slit the back of the bear open. I pulled out the stuffing. Buried deep inside the polyester fiber were vacuum-sealed packs of cash. I cut one open, $100 bills. I counted them. There were 10 packs, $100,000 in total. I sat on the floor, staring at the money. It was her emergency fund. She must have brought it to our house that night, intending to hide it somewhere safe. Somewhere the FBI wouldn't look if they raided the manor. She used my son's toy, a gift she gave him, with contempt as a safe deposit box for her getaway money. The irony was perfect. She had hidden her salvation in the hands of the grandson she despised. Julian walked in. He saw the money. He saw the bear. He understood immediately. She put this in Leo's room, Julian said, his voice cold.
She turned our son into an accomplice without him even knowing.
What do we do with it? I asked. If we turn it in, it sits in an evidence locker for 10 years. If we keep it, we don't keep it, Julian said immediately. That money is cursed. It is blood money. I have an idea, I said.
The next day, I walked into the offices of the Safe Harbor Youth Center, a nonprofit in Providence that helps at-risk children and victims of domestic abuse. I placed a heavy envelope on the director's desk.
This is an anonymous donation, I said.
The director opened the envelope. Her eyes went wide.
Ma'am, this is $100,000.
Use it for the kids, I said. Use it to give them a voice. Use it to help them stand up to bullies. I walked out of the center feeling lighter than I had in years. The money that Madeline had stolen to protect her own power was now going to empower the very children she would have looked down upon. It was the ultimate poetic justice. We kept only what was legally ours. Julian's legitimate share of the estate, which Serafina, now the trustee of the Phoenix Trust, distributed fairly. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough for a down payment on a house. Enough for Leo's college fund. Enough to live without fear. The dead man's switch had done its job. It hadn't just saved the company. It had reset the moral compass of the family. The rot was gone, and for the first time, the Vance legacy wasn't about money, it was about survival. 6 months have passed since the flashing lights of the federal convoy illuminated the driveway of the estate formerly known as the Hawthorns. The seasons have turned, trading the biting gray wind of that terrible November for the soft, verdant promise of late spring, and now, finally, the crisp onset of a new winter. But the chill in the air is different this year. It is not the cold of a mausoleum. It is the bracing, clean cold of a blank page. I drove through the gates of the estate this morning, but I did not have to punch a code into a keypad, and I did not feel the tightening in my chest that used to accompany every visit to my mother-in-law. The iron gates, which once stood as sentinels guarding a fortress of greed, were pinned wide open. A new sign hung from the stone pillars, hand-painted in bright, welcoming colors, the Phoenix Center for Youth Arts. Serafina has done exactly what she promised. She took the blood money, the bribes, and the stolen legacy, and she transmuted them into something beautiful. The ballroom, where Madeline used to hold court like a queen, is now a dance studio for underprivileged children. The dining room, where my son was slapped for spilling sauce, is now a communal art space covered in drop cloths and smelling of acrylic paint and wet clay. The silence that used to suffocate this house has been chased away by the cacophony of piano lessons, laughter, and the chaotic joy of children being allowed to be children. Madeline Vance will never hear that music. Last week, the final gavel fell. The trial was swift, mostly because the evidence was so overwhelming that her high-priced defense team crumbled before they even reached the opening statements. Madeline was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and assault. The judge, a woman who had clearly read every page of the forensic report I compiled, showed no mercy. She stripped Madeline of every asset she had tried to hide: the villa in Zurich, the accounts in the Caymans, the jewelry, the cars. It is all gone. The Queen of Newport is now inmate number 7492, living in a 6x8 cell with a stainless steel toilet and a view of a concrete wall. We did not go to the sentencing. We did not need to see her in chains to know we were free. Instead, we focused on Arthur. We moved him to the Elms, a specialized memory care facility in Connecticut, with sprawling gardens and staff who treat him with the dignity he was denied for a decade. I visit him every Sunday. He does not always know my name, but he knows he is safe. Last week, he held my hand and told me a story about a wooden horse. He smiled when he said it. He is living in a perpetual present, unburdened by the past, and for him, that is a mercy. But the biggest change, the one that makes my heart ache with a good kind of pain, is Julian. The man who used to shrink into himself at the sound of a raised voice is gone. In his place is a man who whistles while he makes coffee. Julian finally quit the consulting job his mother forced him into, a job he hated, and opened his own boutique architecture firm. It is a small operation. Just him and a drafter in a loft downtown. But he is designing affordable, sustainable housing. He is building homes for families, not monuments for egos. He comes home smelling of sawdust and graphite, tired but fulfilled. And he has become the father Leo deserved all along. Tonight is Thanksgiving. It has been exactly 1 year since the slap that started the war. We decided to host it at our new house. It is not a mansion. It is a 4-bedroom colonial with a creaky porch and a yard that needs mowing. But it is ours. It was bought with clean money, and it is filled with clean air. The guest list is eclectic. Serafina is here with her husband, Marcus the man Madeline tried to erase, and their 3 beautiful, boisterous children. Elena Rostova, our shark of a lawyer, is here too, having traded her power suit for a cashmere sweater, laughing as she tries to explain legal theory to my mother. The kitchen is a disaster zone, and I love it. "The turkey is burning," Serafina yelled, laughing as she pulled the bird out of the oven. The skin was charred black in places, a far cry from the perfect, golden birds Madeline used to have catered. "It adds character," Julian shouted back from the living room, where he was wrestling on the floor with Leo and his cousins. We didn't panic. We didn't freeze in fear of judgment. We just ordered 5 large pizzas to supplement the dry turkey. We pushed 2 folding tables together to accommodate everyone. There is no 19th century Belgian lace tablecloth today. We are using a paper tablecloth that Leo and his cousins decorated with crayons. There is no bone china. We are eating off sturdy, colorful stoneware. And most importantly, there is no fear. I stood at the head of the table, not to preside, but to serve. I looked at Leo. He is 9 now. He has grown 2 inches. The bruise on his cheek faded long ago, and the emotional scar seems to have faded with it. He was currently deep in a debate with his cousin about the aerodynamics of the volcano they were building for the science fair. He was loud. He was messy. He had pizza sauce on his chin, and he wasn't looking at the door, waiting for someone to scold him. He was completely, wonderfully at ease. "Avery." Julian touched my arm. "Are you okay?" I looked at my husband. "I am better than okay. I am happy." We sat down. We didn't say a formal grace. We just went around the table and said what we were thankful for. When it got to me, I looked at the faces around me, the lawyer who fought for us, the sister-in-law who returned from exile, the husband who found his spine, and the son who saved us all just by being himself. "I am thankful," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "that I learned the truth about family. Family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. It is about who is willing to bleed for you. It is about the people who stand up when it would be easier to sit down." Glasses clinked. There was a chorus of amen and cheers. As the meal wound down and we were groaning over pumpkin pie, Julian stood up. He tapped his glass with a spoon. The room quieted down. But it was a warm silence, not a cold one. "I have one more thing," Julian said. He looked nervous, but in a good way. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He walked over to Leo. "Leo, stand up for a second." "Bud," Julian said. Leo stood up, wiping crumbs from his shirt. "What is it?" "Dad." The word dad still made Julian smile every time he heard it. "There was a man named Silas," Julian said, getting down on one knee so he was eye level with the boy. "He was my grandfather. He was a good man, but he didn't always know how to stop the bad things from happening. But he left something behind. He left a watch, and for a long time. This watch was hidden away by people who thought that only certain special people deserved to hold it." Julian opened the box. Inside lay the antique gold pocket watch, the one Madeline had sworn would never be touched by a mongrel. It gleamed in the warm light of the dining room. "It is an heirloom," Julian continued. "It represents the future of this family, and the future isn't about where you came from, Leo. It is about who you are. You are the bravest person I know. You took a hit, and you kept standing. You are the reason we are all here today." Julian took the watch out and clipped it onto Leo's belt loop, sliding the gold timepiece into his pocket. "This belongs to you now, Leo Vance," Julian said firmly. "You are my son. You are a Vance, and you are the heir to the best part of us." Leo looked down at the watch, his eyes wide. He touched the cool metal. Then he threw his arms around Julian's neck.
"Thanks, Dad," he whispered.
I watched them, tears finally spilling over. Not tears of rage or frustration, but tears of relief. The circle was closed. The legacy had been cleansed. Later that night, after the guests had left, and Leo was asleep with the pocket watch on his nightstand, I stood by the large bay window in the living room. Julian came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder.
"What are you looking at?" he asked softly.
"The snow," I said. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, heavy. Fat flakes drifted down from the dark sky, coating the street, the trees, and the roof of our new home in a layer of pristine white. I watched it fall, somewhere, miles away. It was falling on the empty, dark windows of the Hawthorne Manor, burying the manicured gardens where Madeline used to pace. It was falling on the prison yard where she now slept. It was falling on the past. The snow was covering the scars of the earth, smoothing out the rough edges, preparing the ground for whatever would grow next spring. The empire of greed had fallen, dismantled by 6 words and a mother's love, and in its place, something real had taken root. "It is over," I whispered, leaning back into my husband. "No," Julian corrected me, kissing my cheek as we watched the world turn white. "It is just beginning." Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice, resilience, and the true meaning of family. If you enjoyed seeing the Vance empire crumble and Avery rise from the ashes, please take a moment to leave a comment below telling us where you are listening from. We would love to connect with our community from all around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Scarlet Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button to help us share more satisfying stories of revenge and redemption with us everyone.